To solve a quadratic is to find out where the x-intercepts are. So one way that you can solve a quadratic, if there's no b term, so remember there's no term that's in front of x, is by using the square root method. So -6 and 6 are roots of 36 because -6 squared and 6 squared are equal to 36. So when you have x squared equals 25, there's actually two numbers that are going to work for that solution. It's going to be +5 and -5. And we write that shorthand is plus or minus 5. So you have to keep that in mind when you're solving by square roots. So for the first one, what I'm going to do is, there's not a b term, so I can use this technique. So what I'm going to do first is get x squared by itself. So I'm going to add 16 to each side of the equation, and I get x squared equals 16. So the inverse of squaring is square rooting. So I'm going to take the square root of each side and get x equals plus or minus 4. Because -4 squared is 16 and 4 squared is 16. Okay, letter B, I'm going to subtract 10 from each side and get 3x squared equals 27. I need to go further and get x squared by itself. So I have x squared equals 9. So the inverse of squaring is square rooting, and there's two numbers such that when I square it I get 9. So the answer is plus or minus 3. Letter C, I'm going to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to add 25. So I have 64x squared equals 25. Divide by 64. So x squared equals 25 over 64. So I'm going to do the inverse, which is x equals plus or minus. So remember, if you have square roots, you can break this up as the square root of 25 over the square root of 64. So this is plus or minus 5/8 is my answer. And then letter D, I'm going to add 36 to each side. So I get a squared equals 0. And I'm going to take the square root. So a equals plus or minus 0. I don't really need to write plus or minus 0 because it's just 0. Positive 0, negative 0 are both 0. And then letter E, I'm going to add 98. So I get 2x squared equals 98. Then I'm going to divide by 2. So I have x squared equals 49. And then take the square root, so I get x equals plus or minus 7. And then the next problem, I'm going to add 10 to each side because I'm trying to get the x squared by itself. So I get -x squared equals 34. Divide by -1. And I get x squared equals -34. When I go and take the square root, I cannot take the square root of a negative number and have it be a real number. So there's no number that when I square it, there's no real number such that when I square it I get a negative. So this is going to be no solution. There is no number that you could plug in for x and get an answer. The second method of solving a quadratic is to graph it and see where it crosses the x-axis. So to solve by graphing, what I'm going to do is I always want to figure out the vertex first. So remember, to find the vertex you do opposite b over 2a. So it's opposite 2 over 2 times 1. So the vertex is at -1 for the x value, and now I'm going to plug in -1 right here and see what I get. So if I plug in -1, 1 minus 2, -1 plus 1 is 0. So -1, 0. Now I'm going to plug in 1 less and 1 greater. So if I plug in 0, I get 1, because that's the y-intercept, which is the c value, so this has to be 1. So negative 2, 1, and 0, 1. So when I graph it, it looks like this. So when you're solving it, you're trying to find the x-intercept. So I don't need to graph any further, because I can see that the solution is where it crosses the x-axis, which is just 1, where the vertex is. So my solution is going to be x equals negative 1. It only has one solution. The parabola only intersects the x-axis one time. Okay, for the second one, I'm going to graph it by finding the vertex. So if I plug in b is 0, I get 0, negative 4. So 0 squared minus 4. Now I'm going to plug in negative 1 and 1. So negative 1 squared is 1 minus 4 is negative 3. This is negative 3. I'm going to plug in 2 for x. So 2 squared minus 4 is 0. So using symmetry, this is 0. So I plot my parabola, negative 2, 0, negative 1, negative 3, 0, negative 4, 1, negative 3, 2, 0. So my parabola looks like this. And my solutions are the x-intercepts. So my solutions, there's two places where it crosses. It crosses at x equals negative 2 and 2. Okay, letter C example. So you want to graph it, you want to find the vertex, and you want to put that in the middle of your table. So the vertex is opposite b, which is 2, over 2 times 1. So that's 1. I put that in the middle. Plug in 1 for x. So 1 squared minus 2. 1 minus 2 is negative 1, minus 3 is negative 4. I'm going to go 1 less and 1 greater. But if I plug in 0, that's the y-intercept. So that's going to be negative 3, and that's going to be negative 3 using symmetry. Now I'm going to plug in negative 1. So it's 1 plus 2, which is 3 minus 3 is 0. So when I graph this function, I have negative 1, 0, 0, negative 3, 1, negative 4, 2, negative 3, 3, 0. So my solutions are x equals negative 1 and 3. Okay, letter D. I'm going to find my vertex. So I do opposite b over 2a. So this time our b value is 0. So if you plug in 0, you get 1. Now I'm going to plug a number less and greater and fill in my table. So if I plug in negative 1, negative 1 squared plus 1 is 2. And I can use symmetry to put 2 on the other side. And then if I plug in negative 2 squared, I get 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. So when I plot this, I get negative 2, 5, 2, 5, 0, 1, 1, 2, negative 1, 2. Now I'm looking for where it crosses the x-axis. So you'll notice that it doesn't cross. So if it doesn't cross the x-axis, it's just going to be no solution.